what is the marking process like? Because we as students, we submit our assignments to turn it in, and leave it up to our tutors to mark. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting if you can shed some light into what do you actually do, how do you get started, and
yeah, absolutely, fantastic, great question. I will preface this discussion by saying that this is my personal experience, and obviously it won't apply to everybody. And obviously, like you said, I can't give you any definitive answers about different people's marking process, but I can give you some insight into my marking process. The first thing that I do is that I look at a student's assessment. So I'm currently marking assessments for Quiz 101, and I look at the entirety of the assessment. Before I've made any decision about what marking they're getting, I've read through the entire assessment, because I think that a lot of the time students can excel in certain areas of an assessment. So if it's an essay, they might have paragraphs that, they're a little bit off, they're a little bit confusing, a little bit hard to read, but then the next paragraph can be flawless and can be seamless. So before I've made any decision about marking up their comments or marking up anything, I read the entire assessment first, because that gives me a really good overview about what students are saying, what their overall argument is, and really gives me a good sense about where they sit in my sort of internal marking rubric, if I can put it that way. The second thing I do is I go through and I mark up a couple of comments. So I write down, some areas where this might be confusing, where this might be, unclear to the reader. But I also try and make it as even as possible. So if I write a negative comment or a constructive comment, it's probably the better way of putting it, I will back that up by saying that I really like this section of your report. I think constructive criticism should be both positive in the sense that we provide our students with areas of improvement, but we also outline those areas where they need to improve, that they need to provide improvement. And then the last thing I do is that I go through and I calculate their grade based on a predetermined rubric. So that's in the current course that I'm doing, we've predetermined a rubric that then populates a grade for them. And I go through and I see whether my comments match up with that grade. And if they don't, then I have to go back and reconsider whether the grade I've given them is too high or too low, or whether I need to add some more comments about why students are getting the grade they are. Because I think one of the things that confuses students a lot, especially this was my experience as an undergraduate, was that you would get a grade and you would look through, turn it in, and you'd see only 2 or 3 or 4 comments. And you sort of thought to yourself, at least in my experience, I thought to myself, well, how does that help me improve? Like what areas do I actually need to improve on, and what areas were good? So I guess that was one thing that I went into marking with, was that I wanted to make sure that students were able to see where they went well and what areas I thought that they were excelling in, and then also areas where they needed to improve, or areas of improvement or development for them.
That's very interesting that you said that, you look at through the whole essay. Because I genuinely thought that tutors, mark based on your introduction or your thesis or something, which leads to the next question, which is quite relevant. If you had a preference, which part do you spend most of your time on when reading an essay? And is that part, would you say, the most important one?
Great question. These are some tough hitting questions. I like it. I suppose the main areas in an essay that I look at, I don't necessarily focus too much on the introduction, because I think the introduction is very much a setting the stage. Sure, it's important, and sure, it's a way of making sure that the essay flows nicely, and it should introduce, as we all know, it should introduce the main points of the essay. What are you actually going to argue? What are you actually going to say in this essay? And why is it important? But the main areas for me, I suppose, in an essay that I look at are the body paragraphs. So how are they constructed? Are they actually saying what you want them to say? Are they confusing? Are they easy to read? And then the last thing, I suppose, the most important thing for me is the conclusion. Is the conclusion a punchy final stance of trying to convince me, the reader, of your point of view? And I think that those are probably the areas that I focus on more. The conclusion I give more weight to, and other than the introduction. And that's only because it's really the last place. It's really the last ditch effort for a student to really sell and hit every point in the rubric, and really sell to me that, their argument and their point of view is the right way to go about it.